On March 1, 2026, CENTCOM publicly confirmed that 3 United States service members were killed and 5 others were seriously wounded during combat operations directed at Iranian military targets. The command said it would withhold the names of the deceased pending next-of-kin notifications and reported that additional personnel sustained minor injuries, including shrapnel wounds and concussions. International reporting characterized the announcement as the first openly acknowledged American combat fatalities in this phase of the crisis, and noted that the confirmation followed a rapid sequence of strikes and counterstrikes across the Gulf and neighboring states. Major outlets reported that the military action formed part of a named campaign reported in defense outlets as Operation Epic Fury, described by officials as coordinated air, naval, and missile strikes against facilities and assets associated with Iran's military capabilities. Coverage emphasized that the CENTCOM statement provided limited operational detail, citing operational security and family notification protocols as the reasons for withholding location and unit identifiers. Wire services and defense publications relayed that the incidents occurred amid an intense, multi-domain exchange of fire involving air-launched munitions, sea-launched missiles, and unmanned aerial systems. Several international live trackers and briefing summaries compiled rolling totals for deaths and injuries across multiple countries affected by the hostilities and cautioned that figures were provisional. Journalists quoted senior military spokespeople to confirm the casualty numbers while stressing the fluid nature of battlefield reporting and the possibility of revisions as investigations proceeded. Reporting noted that the broader campaign had been prompted by earlier strikes that international outlets said had struck senior Iranian leadership and key military nodes, a development that accelerated reciprocal attacks. Coverage also recorded that the U.S. government and allied partners were engaging diplomatically as military operations continued, and that public and political reaction was immediate, with calls for briefings and legal clarity. This paragraph summarizes facts drawn directly from public CENTCOM statements and international news reporting available at the time of writing. International reporting reconstructs the sequence as an initial set of coordinated strikes by U.S. and allied forces against designated Iranian military and command installations, followed quickly by Iranian counterstrikes and launches by Iran-aligned groups against U.S. bases, ships and partner facilities in the Gulf and neighboring territories. Coverage from multiple wire services and live news feeds described the earliest strikes as concentrating on leadership hubs, missile launch sites, naval command nodes, and air defense systems that officials identified as central to Iran's regional power projection. Several outlets connected the operation to a campaign labeled in defense reporting as Operation Epic Fury, and noted that the campaign intensified after earlier actions that international accounts reported had struck Iran's supreme leadership and senior commanders, a development that Iranian authorities publicly characterized as justification for broad retaliation. Reports described Iran's response as multi-axis, including long-range ballistic and cruise missile launches, sea-launched strikes, and large numbers of unmanned aerial vehicles aimed at degrading U.S. force posture and disrupting logistics. Defense and regional correspondents reported that some incoming weapons were intercepted by layered air defense systems, while others produced localized damage, and that logistics hubs and support areas were at risk from secondary detonations and shrapnel. Live trackers compiled by major newsrooms produced provisional tallies for deaths and injuries that varied by source and that outlets repeatedly flagged as subject to revision. Journalists noted the compressed timeline. Actions and reprisals occurred over hours and days, and emphasized that both military and civilian infrastructures were affected in places where strikes landed. Independent reporting and military briefings quoted in the coverage stressed operational security limits on public detail, explaining why precise site names and unit identifiers were not always available during the initial reporting window. Analysis pieces in international outlets underlined that the rapid, multi-domain nature of the exchange complicated immediate assessments and increased the risk of additional casualties and escalation. Verified, attributed reporting confirmed 3 U.S. service members killed and 5 seriously wounded, with several more treated for minor injuries, and noted that the military had not publicly released names, unit designations, or exact base locations at the time of initial reporting. Defense-focused outlets and wire services reported that the casualties included personnel performing logistics and base support roles, as well as force protection duties, rather than exclusively frontline combat positions, based on initial accounts and anonymous military sources quoted by reporters. Several international publications explain that incidents occurring at logistics hubs, ammunition storage areas, and support installations can generate unpredictable secondary hazards, for example, detonations and fragmentation, that increase risk to support personnel. Journalists covering the region described medevac and stabilization procedures used after the incidents, reporting that seriously wounded personnel were evacuated to regional medical facilities for treatment, and that some were prepared for further transport, depending on condition. Multiple outlets emphasized the limitations of the early reporting window. Official statements cited operational security and family notifications as reasons for withholding granular details, and correspondents warned that casualty tallies and location information could change as investigations and site inspections progressed. Defense analyses included in international reporting highlighted that assets supporting carrier strike groups, air wings, and logistics chains are inherently exposed during large-scale strikes, and that protective measures can be stressed by saturation attacks. Where available, local reporting and live trackers compiled combined tallies of military and civilian casualties across countries affected by strikes and counterstrikes to present broader human cost summaries. Outlets consistently labeled those numbers provisional. The assembled accounts in this paragraph are drawn from official CENTCOM remarks and reporting by international news organizations that filed on-the-record updates and defense summaries during the relevant reporting period. International outlets documented rapid diplomatic, political, and public responses to the CENTCOM confirmation, reporting statements of condolence from U.S. leaders and expressions of concern from regional and global partners as the hostilities continued. Coverage highlighted domestic political reactions in the United States and allied democracies, where lawmakers sought briefings and commentators debated the campaign's objectives, legal basis, and projected duration. Polling data cited by several outlets showed limited public support in some constituencies for an extended kinetic campaign. Allied governments were reported to be engaged in close consultations, with some offering defensive cooperation and others urging restraint to reduce the risk of wider regional conflagration. Economic dispatches carried by international media noted short-term market and shipping volatility tied to the security situation in Gulf transit routes and to insurance and energy sector risk assessments. Humanitarian reporting that appeared alongside military coverage emphasized civilian casualties and infrastructure damage in struck areas and noted pressure on local medical facilities and relief networks. Editorial and analytical pieces across global outlets weighed stated military aims against potential political and humanitarian costs, and emphasized that verified facts remained limited by operational security and the chaotic nature of immediate battle reporting. Several journalists and analysts cautioned audiences to treat early casualty and damage tallies as provisional and to rely on verified official updates and corroborated reporting as events unfolded. The paragraph synthesizes coverage of political and diplomatic reactions published by international news organizations and reflects the factual record available from their reporting at the time. International reporting anchored in official statements and on-the-record briefings identified immediate operational priorities and described likely next steps, accounting for all personnel, investigating the circumstances of the incidents that produced casualties, securing bases and logistics chains, continuing damage limitation and force protection measures, and sustaining intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance to reduce future risk. News outlets quoted senior officials as indicating that precision strikes and defensive operations would continue while diplomats engaged to manage escalation, and that command teams were preparing contingencies for a range of battlefield developments. Defense analysts cited in the coverage warned that strikes against military-related infrastructure can produce secondary effects that imperil support personnel, underscoring why casualty patterns may include non-combat units. And they urged monitoring of official casualty updates as investigations mature. Political reporting described domestic pressures on decision-makers to explain objectives, legal authority, and exit conditions, and noted that Allied diplomatic calculations would influence the campaign's tempo and scope. Economic and energy coverage highlighted that uncertainty over Gulf security had immediate effects on shipping, insurance, and commodity markets that would persist while hostilities continued. Several international commentators and analysts emphasized that humanitarian access in affected areas and plans for reconstruction would become more urgent if operations continued, and urged transparency in casualty accounting to aid public understanding. Finally, reporting across reputable outlets uniformly reiterated the provisional character of early tallies and the need to track verified updates. This script confines itself to details published by international news organizations at the time of writing and recognizes that subsequent official releases or investigative reporting may revise elements of the record.